Getting old can be scary. Growing up is a weird, awkward, and at times painful process that for many of us can feel like never ends. It seems like as soon as we become self-conscious, we're constantly reminded that there's a clock ticking away our youth. When people say things like, enjoy being young, it's the best time of your life, it really paints a bleak picture of what life looks like when you're not so young. We think of the term coming of age and what it means to become an adult. What does that really entail? Does it simply mean turning 18, a measurable and predetermined age that governments have decided is long enough to have existed to officially be declared an adult? As someone who's in their mid-30s and has the advantage of hindsight, it's kind of insane to me that an 18-year-old kid is able to take out student loans, join the military, gamble, buy tobacco products, and sign contracts, although you still can't drink alcohol until you're 21 in the United States. I had no idea what I was doing at that age, and honestly, I didn't really care. I was happy to wait tables and party with my friends every weekend. I was paying my rent, paying for and going to community college because I had nothing else to do, and I was happy to not worry about the future. Teenagers are highly emotional people, and I know that's a pretty big blanket statement, but in general, the emotional response and intensity is just higher and more at the forefront when we're in our teenage years. It shouldn't be too hard for each of us to recall something dumb we did or said as teenagers that just doesn't make any sense to us now. A big reason for this is because research shows that the human brain isn't done fully developing until we're about the age of 25. One of the last parts of the brain to mature is the prefrontal cortex. This area of the brain is where we process moment-to-moment input from our surroundings, compare them to past experiences, and then decide how to react to what's happening around us. The prefrontal cortex basically gives us the ability to plan, prioritize, and make good decisions based on the information we're taking in. During our teen years, the connections between the emotional part of the brain and the decision-making center are still developing. Teenagers process incoming information in the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain. The amygdala regulates anxiety, aggression, fear conditioning, emotional memory, and social cognition. So this explains why some of the choices teens make can seem baffling to older adults. They're making decisions with an overwhelming amount of emotional input. We all have our amygdala to blame when we're up late at night, unable to sleep because we're thinking about some cringy choices we made when we were younger. But as we all know, things don't always go exactly the way they're planned. The same is true when it comes to the development of the brain. When certain regions don't get fully baked or pathways meant to connect certain sections aren't functional, the results can be truly terrifying. We live in a society. Joker memes aside, we all live together in a community and society, and by doing so, whether we know it or not, have signed a social contract. This social contract says that we all live together with the same general understanding of moral and ethical rules of behavior. This can vary from culture to culture, but the gist is basically the same. There's a fairly large range of flexibility when it comes to living within this social contract. But what if someone falls completely outside the bounds of the agreement? One of the labels we could give someone like this is a sociopath. A quick and simple definition of a sociopath is someone who has no conscience and is extremely antisocial. This definition is technically accurate, but it also falls a little short in other areas. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, and the 5 stands for 5th edition, so roll for initiative, is published by the American Psychiatric Association and is considered the authority on mental illnesses. The DSM-5's diagnostic term for sociopathy is antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is defined by the DSM-5 as a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since the age of 15 years and is indicated by 3 or more of the following: failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest, deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults, reckless disregard for safety of self or others, consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations, lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalize having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. Regardless of how we may feel when we see a kid freaking out in the checkout line at the grocery store, technically sociopathic children do not exist. Because of ethical reasons and the fact that children are still growing and developing, a person can't be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder until age 18. This doesn't mean that a child can't exhibit early signs of heading down a road ending with that diagnosis. Conduct disorder begins in late childhood or early adolescence, and can be a precursor to antisocial personality disorder. Conduct disorder is more common among boys than girls. Boys with the condition tend to be more physically aggressive, while girls typically run away, lie, or abuse substances. Here are some diagnostic criteria for identifying conduct disorder. Bullies or threatens others, often initiates physical fights, used a weapon to cause harm, physically cruel to people or animals, destruction of property, deceitfulness or theft, serious violation of rules. Around 50% of children with conduct disorder stop these behaviors by the time they reach adulthood. They simply get older, grow up, and grow out of it. But for some, the behaviors don't stop. It's not because they can't stop, because they simply don't see anything wrong with the actions and choices they make. Why would you completely change who you are as a person when from your perspective you've always acted in a rational manner? The Wasp Factory by Iain Banks follows a 16-year-old boy named Frank who lives on a small island off the coast of Scotland with his father. The island is connected to a nearby village by a bridge which serves as the only way on or off the island home. The Wasp Factory isn't quite a horror book, but more of a psychological mystery with some horror elements thrown in. Honestly, it almost reads more like a matter-of-fact slice-of-life story from the perspective as a soon-to-be sociopath. We quickly find out that Frank is a very odd kid. He has very ritualistic and superstitious habits, violent tendencies, is extremely misogynistic, and a narcissist. Frank pretty much has free reign over the island on which he and his father live to do whatever he wants to do with his days, which does lead to some disturbing pastimes. He creates and builds weapons that he uses to hurt and torture the local animals on the island. Frank's father is some kind of doctor or scientist and is pretty eccentric himself, lying to his children for fun and making them memorize the measurements of random household objects. Frank's father wanted Frank to essentially be off the grid, so his birth was at home and kept a secret. His father never registered the birth, so it's like Frank doesn't even exist. He has spent most of his life on the island being homeschooled or teaching himself skills. A major part of the narrative is that we follow Frank during his day-to-day activity of performing strange rituals to protect the island that involve creating totems and using animal skulls. While this is going on, Frank begins to reminisce about his childhood, and that's when we learn that by the age of 16, he has already killed 3 people. He killed 2 of his cousins and his younger brother. All of this taking place when they were all children. When Frank recounts the memories of how and why he killed them, he highlights details with a cold, matter-of-fact demeanor. He has no remorse, and in some instances feels a sense of pride in the creativity of how he killed them, and with the way he was able to manipulate the adults around him to get away with it. Frank has been enjoying his existence on the island, even though he is getting to the age of adulthood, and he has no plans of ever leaving the island and joining the outside world. This plan starts to derail when an officer stops by to let his father know that Frank's older brother, Eric, has escaped from a psychiatric hospital and is most likely headed their way. This causes a lot of stress in Frank. His brother was always sensitive, but was studying to become a doctor regardless. But during his first few years of medical work, he had a mental break, which caused him to become extremely violent, bullying local kids into eating maggots and setting dogs on fire, which even Frank feels is a step too far. As Eric makes his way back to the island, he randomly calls Frank from payphones to let him know he is on his way and to tell Frank about the violent acts he's committing along the road. This coming-of-age story has the interesting twist of being told from the perspective of someone who has conduct disorder that will most likely evolve into antisocial personality disorder. All the normal reasoning and thought processes are missing, and instead we get the cold and detached justifications from someone who feels they are above everyone else and who can kill without any remorse. With the countdown of Eric making his way home, Frank turns to his rituals to help him figure out how to deal with it, and if he should finally grow up and leave the island once and for all. School, grades, and extracurriculars are often at the forefront of conversation when people talk about childhood development. An often overlooked element, and one that feels like it's slowly disappearing among the growing number of helicopter parents, is freely chosen play. Freely chosen play is when a child decides and controls their play using their own instincts and imagination without guidance from adults. That's why kids will often do and say crazy things or try to get you to play insane games that seem like they make no sense. This kind of playing is important because it helps kids develop physical health and social skills. They're able to learn how to explore their feelings, express themselves, and work out emotional aspects of life. Despite all the benefits that come from playing, time allotted for free play has been going down for some children. A 1989 survey by the National Association of Elementary School Principals found that 96% of school systems had at least one recess period. Another survey done a decade later found that only 70% of children had a recess period, including kindergarten. Many school districts have made the decision to provide less free time and physical outlets as a reaction to the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. This has reduced time for recess, the creative arts, and physical education in an effort to focus more on reading and mathematics. Generally speaking, girls and boys have different ways of playing. There are always exceptions to these kinds of things, but for the most part there are identifiable patterns. Boys tend to play more competitive, rule-oriented group games, while girls interact in smaller groups, have conversations, and walk and talk with their friends. There is also a difference in levels of risk aversion in relation to gender. A study published in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization found that adolescent girls display significantly greater risk aversion than adolescent boys. They conducted experiments with over 1,400 children aged 3 to 15 years old. An interesting takeaway is that there is no gender gap in risk preference among children ages 3 to 12, but around age 13 to 15 years old, girls start to display significantly greater risk aversion than boys. Other research on this topic finds that women have a greater focus on potential losses and negative incomes when risk is involved, while men generally focus more on what could possibly be gained. This can also be tied to data that shows women generally live longer than men do. Men have a higher rate of usage and death resulting from things like smoking, alcohol, drug abuse, and occupational risks. Add that on top of other traditional masculine things like fighting and dangerous hobbies and pastimes, and you've got the formula for a shorter life. Again, there are always exceptions to these kinds of things. We're all different and have our own experiences and preferences. When I was younger, my parents put me in sports because that's just what you did with boys, but as I got older, I discovered I didn't really have an interest in competing, and I really didn't like contact sports. There was an exception for martial arts though. I really loved Kung Fu and Taekwondo, but I feel like those were more focused on self-improvement. The more I grew into myself, I realized I wanted to play music, and I loved gardening and growing flowers and plants, which are traditionally more feminine interests. Moving forward with that mindset, what if there was a friend group of teenage girls who not only had a preference for risk-taking, but were absolutely infatuated by it? Since this behavior isn't normally shown among their peers, they feel a need to hide it, playing dangerous games in secret, a deadly club that only they know about. How far will they push things, and how much pain will they endure while chasing a rush they can never seem to catch? Growing up and getting through your teenage years is a journey of self-discovery for not only yourself, but also the group of friends you surround yourself with. These years can be both among the best and worst of your life. Everything feels new and exciting, and the world still has potential, but at the same time, you're also trying to navigate it while learning how to socialize with hormones and emotions raging uncontrollably inside your body. Jawbone by Mónica Ojeda details prepubescent hormonal teenage angst and horror. Students at Delta Bilingual Academy High School for Girls display ruthless violence, both physical and psychological. The girls in this book inflict pain and torment to themselves and those around them with a precision that cuts to the emotional core of their targets. Jawbone is essentially a coming-of-age story. Growing up, discovering yourself, and finding your place in the world and among your peers. The book follows a group of teenage girls who attend an all-girl high school. This friend group is extremely close, and they become even more tight-knit as they make some dark discoveries about themselves and develop some secret rituals as a way of carving out a place in the world that's meant just for them. As time goes on, they escalate into more extreme and thrilling activities like strangling, biting, drinking blood, and pushing each other down the stairs. These dark tendencies occasionally spill to the outside world and create problems for the people around them. The two girls that the narrative puts the most focus on are named Annalise and Fernanda. Annalise and Fernanda have a reputation for pushing each other, their friends, and their classmates to extreme limits and getting them to perform horrific acts they would never thought were possible. In contrast to the group of girls, we also follow one of their teachers, Miss Clara. To the outside world, she presents herself as calm, collected, and a professional educator. Although she had recently recovered from a traumatic event that occurred at her previous school, she is now ready to get back into the teaching world. She only seems generally put together from the outside. On the inside, she is terrified, second-guessing, and not sure how to navigate her environment. She was never able to fully grow up and come of age like her current students are actively trying to do. Miss Clara was never able to discover who she actually is and develop a personality of her own. Instead, she developed an obsession and at times highly inappropriate fascination with becoming exactly like her mother. Not only choosing to become an educator because that's what her mother did, but even wearing her dead mother's old clothes to feel like she is actually becoming her. The almost competing forces of Miss Clara trying to recover from her trauma and integrate into life at Delta Bilingual Academy High School for Girls, and Annalise and Fernanda's dangerous games eventually clash. Not only is the fallout from these forces horrific, but everything leading both parties to converge is unpleasant and uncomfortable. Growing up is hard, and the difficult process is made worse when the girls discover the pleasure they get from putting themselves and each other through sick, twisted, and dangerous situations. On a certain level, they know it's wrong, so they hide away in a private world they've created for themselves. A world where they can explore and express their most primal fears and desires with each other. But just like the magical summers we look back on fondly, everything comes to an end eventually. Some things gently taper off and are over before you even know, others fizzle out, leaving a slight disappointment, and a few explode with a climactic conclusion that can haunt your memories for the rest of your life. For many of us, getting older and being able to spend our twilight years surrounded by our friends, family, and loved ones is the ideal situation when it comes to aging. But the reality is that not all of us will get that chance. Some of us won't make it to those later years due to an accident or illness, but for others, something that many might consider worse could happen. We could make it to those golden years and not even know it, not remembering the life we lived that got us there, and unable to remember the names and faces of those closest to us who were right by our side for the entire ride. Dementia isn't actually a specific disease, but an umbrella term used to group together several symptoms that someone is suffering due to a number of different diseases. Dementia can cause both cognitive and psychological changes. Cognitive changes can include memory loss, problems communicating, getting lost, trouble planning and organizing, and poor coordination. Some psychological changes are personality changes, depression, anxiety, paranoia, and hallucinations. There are several kinds of dementia, but two common types are Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive disease that begins with mild memory loss and can possibly lead to losing the ability to have conversations and even respond to your environment. It's the most common type of dementia and affects parts of the brain that control thought, memory, and language. As of right now, scientists aren't completely sure what causes the disease, but think that it likely isn't one single factor, but several stacked on top of each other. Age is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, followed by family history. While genetics play a role, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll get the disease if you have family history of it, and the risk can be mitigated with a healthy lifestyle. Vascular dementia is the second most common type of dementia. It happens when blood flow to the brain is reduced by a partial blockage or complete block caused by a blood clot. Dementia and other related conditions are difficult to tell apart because they share similar symptoms and signs. Two examples of vascular dementia are mixed dementia, when symptoms of both vascular dementia and Alzheimer's exist, and multi-infarct dementia, when small and often silent blockages affect flow to a specific part of the brain. What makes this one scary is the changes after each blockage may not be obvious, but they can add up over time. People suffering from dementia are often cared for in the home by family members. Having a dedicated caregiver can often have positive effects on the person suffering from dementia, but the reality is that it isn't always possible to have someone at home full time. And as the symptoms progress, it can become an increasingly difficult responsibility and place a huge burden on the caregiver. As more specialized care is needed, many people who are able to place their family members suffering from dementia in the care of a specialized living facility. The right continuing care community can provide much needed structure, attention, and treatments to manage symptoms. But try to imagine you yourself are approaching these later years. Things aren't coming as quickly as they used to, and having conversations or recalling memories isn't as easy. You find yourself being placed in a continuing care community. And at first, things seem great. You no longer have to worry about getting lost or confused, your meals and leisure time are handled for you, and you're surrounded with peers you can connect with. But slowly you start to notice strange things happening around the facility, and the staff are also acting a little weird. Is it just paranoia from your dawning dementia, or is that just what everyone around you wants you to believe? We We Spread by Iain Reid effortlessly guides you through feelings of melancholy, fear, horror, and joy while reflecting on a life lived and maybe not quite remembered. The existential horror of growing old, accelerating memory loss, and loneliness that comes from being the last one alive among your friends and family. This book puts you in the shoes of a senior care facility resident who suspects something sinister is going on behind the scenes. Penny is an elderly woman who's still adjusting to living alone since her longtime partner passed away. Right away, the narrative sets the tone of frustration and fear of being cognitively sharp, but not physically able to act in a way that reflects it. Penny has always been fiercely independent and still walks to the grocery store on her own, frequently visits a nearby park, and has been a painter for her entire life. One day, Penny decides to try to change a light bulb on her own and ends up having a serious fall. After being passed out on the floor for who knows how long, she is eventually discovered by her landlord, who decides it's time for things to change. This is where the story really starts to take off and make us question both Penny and the people around her. Penny's landlord said that her partner arranged for her to be sent to a nice senior care home when she was no longer able to care for herself. Penny has no memory of this and is also seeing the early signs of her autonomy being taken away, as she had no involvement with packing her apartment and choosing what to bring with her. Her landlord did all of that. Right when Penny arrives at the senior care home, things feel very off. The owner of the facility is a little standoffish, and the routines and schedules are very stiff. Everyone eats together, then works on their craft, and has a bedtime. The facility only has 4 residents, including Penny, and 2 staff, Shelley the owner and Jack, a caretaker. Shelley is obsessed with the residents constantly working and producing. She says things like the work is what keeps us alive. Penny is a painter, one resident is a mathematician, another is a musician, and the last one is a linguist. At first, Penny enjoys her time at the home. She has time and energy to paint again, and being around peers her own age has made her realize how lonely she actually was living by herself. But slowly, she starts losing time and misremembering things. She's only been at the home for 3 days, but the caretakers tell her it's been months. Penny starts to suspect more ominous intentions from Shelley, the owner of the home, and starts asking herself questions like, why does Shelley disappear for long periods of time? What are these extra rooms around the facility? And when did these IVs appear in my room, and what are they for? The horror in this book is very subtle and comes from the way the writing easily makes us empathize with Penny. As I was reading, I really felt things from Penny's perspective, the loss of time and the growing paranoia. There is some serious fear in not only feeling your memory fail you, but also being unsure about whether you can trust the people around you. The book tackles themes such as dementia and loss of autonomy, as well as regret, control, and loneliness. There's true terror when Penny feels trapped in the nursing home, but bounces back and forth between wanting to escape and being confused about where she is and how she's ended up in different places, seemingly losing large chunks of time. Often she is brought back to Earth by Jack the caretaker, which gives her glimmers of hope and trust that she might actually need to be cared for. But these moments are fleeting between hints of something more sinister lurking in the background. The book isn't always casting a regretful eye on the past and a life not fully lived, though. There are some absolutely loving moments between Penny and the other residents. They form friendships, and she learns that it's never too late to meet new people and care deeply for new friends. Although this does make things all the more heartbreaking when Penny's world finally begins to crumble. Life can be both a gift and a challenge. Moments of joy and connection juxtaposed with the fears and uncertainties of aging create the rich tapestry of the human experience. The ticking clock may remind us of the passage of time, but within each moment lies the potential for growth and self-discovery, forging the way to create meaningful connections. Just make sure you and everyone you surround yourself with are in your right minds.